I'm doing excellent today. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Our pod here on Good For You, Bad For You kind of got me thinking about this article that I read a couple of weeks ago or so, a week and a half ago. It was about, I don't know if you saw it, it was about how eating a hot dog can take like 36 minutes off of your life per serving.
I missed this. This was on this kind of viral thing on the internet kind of thing, or what?
I mean, like every news channel source, they all like it was everywhere. It was kind of crazy. So I looked up the original article and I just skimmed it. I didn't like go too deep into it. But it was really interesting because it talked about all different foods. And it was not only looking at their impact on like human health, but also on global health. So the impact that producing these products has on the environment overall. So it was kind of an interesting article, but it kind of got a little ridiculous because you could be like they mentioned, if a person if they replace 10% of their processed meat intake with a plant-based diet, just 10%, then that could add, I don't remember exactly the amount, like 40 something minutes to your life. So, in my head, in my kind of warped little brain, I'm like, so for every hot dog, I just have to like replace, like I started doing the math, like, okay, then what if I just have like some nuts and seeds along with the hot dog? Then do I gain 12 minutes? I mean, it got really ridiculous. And we were talking about clickbait in terms of food in the press. And I think this article definitely was clickbait. I mean, it had interesting information in it. And then, the overall conclusion was, it was interesting in that like it did look at things globally. And I do think that is important, but it was kind of putting it on the individual, which is fine. And like, I personally have no problem with replacing 10%. I probably already have 10% of my diet is plant-based. It's probably more, and it's more than that.
I was going to say you get like 70% of your diet is probably plant-based.
Yeah. But it doesn't look at the industry that produces these products that are actually having the environmental impact. So it's like telling the consumer, the individual consumer, oh, if you cut this out of your diet, you're going to add blank amount of minutes to your life and help to save the earth, instead of looking at the various industries that are creating these products. So I just thought that whole thing was like super interesting, and it was kind of relevant, even though we're not talking about meat.
Okay, I have a burning question though.
Yeah.
How did they figure this out? Where is this data coming from?
I'm going to send you the article. I'm just going to send you the article because it's got like pretty little graphs, and it's what's super interesting is that because I always scroll down to the I'm the kind of person, I always scroll to the end of a book. I go to the last page and I want to know how it ends. So when I see an article like this, I scroll to the bottom, and I believe it was sponsored by I have it here on my computer somewhere. Hold on. The research was funded by an unrestricted grant from the National Dairy Council and the University of Michigan Dow Sustainability Fellowship. So I thought that was super interesting that it was sponsored in part by the National Dairy Council.
Give up your hot dogs and pick up a milkshake? I'm just kidding.
So, and this is a good time to mention, we don't have a website where we upload things, but we do have a Pinterest page. And so I do put links to some of the things that I talk about on our Pinterest page. So I will open up our Pinterest page and have a link to that actual article.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to actually put a link to a sort of a rebuttal from a physician.
I'm pretty sure if I read it, I would want to rebut it. Just hearing the information, it sounds so crazy and off the wall. And,
Well, just the fact that they looked at like over 5,800 foods to see what the impact was like on the individual as well as on the environment.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like, I mean, you could get to like, okay, so if I have like a serving of wings, then how many sesame seeds do I need to eat to count? I mean, it's really crazy. And I don't think it should be looked at the way that the media is kind of picking it up. Like,
Sure. This is a classic spin zone.
it is. It really is. And so, but I think that kind of applies to like what we're going to talk about today with
Good
coffee,
point.
right?
Oh, so you're saying what the media makes of some of the coffee research is not necessarily always what the research is saying.
I do. And I think that they're going to go with whatever is the most sensational at the moment, because you
Sure.
find articles that go back and forth within like a week. But then I also think it is a good way to look at, well, maybe the next two subjects, coffee and soy, is looking at the global impact, the sustainability impact too. So those are things that I like to consider when I consume things. I'm not 100% that way. I'm not like fanatical. I will go to eat in a restaurant where maybe they don't have grass-fed beef because I want something that looks delicious on the menu. But it is something that I am very aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that as an individual, just being mindful of those types of global impacts is important.
Yes. Well, that brings to mind, did you ever, I know you didn't watch the show much, neither did I, to be perfectly honest, but on Portlandia, there's one episode where they're sitting in a restaurant, and of course they're in Portland, and they get to the point where they keep asking so many questions about the chicken. They get to the point that they're going to visit the farm where the chicken was raised, and
I did. I saw that episode. I thought that was really funny up to a certain point. Because I recognize myself in that,
Sure.
but in Portland it's common. But if you go like in Arizona, when I lived down there, and I'm like, so what was this chicken's background? What's I find myself doing that in other places. But no, it is an important thing. But at the same time, it's the individual, but it's also the greater corporation.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a woman that was a patient of mine in my early days of my practice, a successful businesswoman, said it so concisely. She said, you vote with your dollars. And you basically, when you spend money, are endorsing or not endorsing that money flow, right? So you're saying, when I shop local and I know that there's families nearby or there's farms nearby that are sustained with that. I mean, there's a little bit of that in that piece where I think they're trying to get people to create the either, demand or lack of demand by changing people's spending habits. And I think that's part of our capitalist structure.
But I'd have to go back and look at the other articles that I saw on the internet. I don't remember them really delving into the ecological impact. They were more interested in, the hours you're going to lose from eating, from eating processed meats. So that was just my like kind of that was my little tangent. But it really it does apply to coffee, and I think it does apply to soy as well. Just got to know your sources.
So that the source of the whatever, the coffee in this case, in our discussion today, counts as to whether it's healthy or not healthy.
To the earth.
To the earth. I would say to the person too, but that's just
to the person and to the earth, right? Because when we think of things like organic versus not organic, I think we tend to think about ourselves, but there's also the impact of non-organic coffee farming practices that can affect the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I see what you're saying now. All right, let's talk about coffee.
Let's talk about coffee. And neither of us are drinking. Are you drinking? I'm drinking water right now.
It's too late in the day for coffee for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I did my share of coffee this morning. Now I am drinking kombucha.
Nice.
Brew Doctor Love. That's what they call it. Love. It's got lavender, chamomile, and jasmine green.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm. See?
And they're not even a sponsor yet.
No. That's funny. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. Okay. So coffee, let's start with like the positive note. Because the first episode in this pod was a bit of a downer. So let's start on the positive note of coffee being good for you.
All right. Well, the most positive note for those of us who like coffee is that it's delicious.
It is delicious. And I mean, I drink my coffee black. Do you drink yours black as well?
No, I put a little dollop of cream in mine.
Okay.
I will admit it. I know a lot of people. I can tolerate dairy just fine, and I like it smoother, a little smoother than black. The mouthfeel.
I think you need to try the cold brew. I mean, the weird thing with the cold brew is that I do end up heating it up
Mhm.
because because I'm not going to drink iced coffee in the winter in the Pacific Northwest, but it is smoother.
All right, I'll try it.
When
I'm
you're
committed.
up here, I'll give you some. I'll make you some.
I will definitely try it.
So number one on the good list is it tastes good.
Yeah, I mean, come on. And if you don't like it, then you would disagree with me. But if you're a coffee, people don't like coffee. They love coffee. You love it or you don't drink it because you don't really like it or you don't like the effects of it.
Or you drink it because like I started drinking it in art school because it kept me up and I just drank disgusting instant and I'd probably put the water right in the half used jar and just I was drinking it for the caffeine in art school.
Yeah, well, I don't think I've ever had. I I learned I became a bit of a coffee connoisseur because I was a barista for a while.
I was a barista too.
Yeah, super fun.
A lot of fun. Were you a barista in the Pacific Northwest?
I was living in San Diego at the time.
Okay, so that's probably it's hard to be a barista here in the Portland area because people really know what they want from their coffee, and it's different when I was on the East Coast and when I was living in New Mexico. I learned things differently, so it's a whole different culture here. So it's
Mm.
probably different in San Diego as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It was the mid '90s in San Diego, and I had a few barista jobs. One of them was actually at a place that was only did nighttime entertainment and coffee, and it's the place where Jewel got her start. She was
Oh,
only
cool.
16 years old at the time. So nobody knew her. So there was nobody there, but like three people, and Jewel was on stage doing her thing with her guitar. So, anyways, that's kind of my big memory of the whole place. And I did work in other places, and you know what? I don't think people were that picky yet because it was the mid '90s, and people didn't know enough to be picky about their coffee.
And when I worked here, it was the summer before I started naturopathic medical school. I'd never experienced something like that. I mean, people were ordering cappuccinos wet or dry. They were requesting certain temperatures for their coffee. It was something like I'd never learned that
Yeah.
when I was a barista, like in other states. It was strange. The coffee culture here is strong.
Yes. Well, and I can tell you, I drink a lot of coffee when I was a barista because I drink my mistakes. You might make six mistakes in a day. I do just like easily 6 or 10 shots of espresso in a day in my 20s, early 20s.
I actually had given up coffee when I was living in New York. And I think even when I moved down to Richmond, Virginia, I had given up coffee. So when I moved out to Portland and I got the job, I wasn't drinking coffee. And then I started drinking decaf. And then I moved on to the hard stuff once school started.
Oh yeah. Plus they make you open those places up at like 5 in the morning. So you need a shot of espresso just to start a day there.
I was doing great
Yeah.
until I fell off the wagon. But yeah, I actually was a barista and was not drinking coffee at the time. I loved it and I could talk about coffee all day, but I just wasn't drinking it. Well, I think because this is the cancer pod, like there has been news about the association of drinking coffee, the positive association of drinking coffee and the risk of certain cancers.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming. So can I just one caveat to, and I know we're supposed to only be talking about the good stuff, but since we're talking about risk of cancer, there's not a lot of cancers that coffee has been linked to. The only two that I know of that are significant is a lot of consumption, like a pot of coffee or more a day, is linked to bladder cancer. And we could talk about why that might be. And the other is when women are pregnant and they drink a ton of coffee. Like again, when I say a ton, I'm talking about like a pot, right? A pot of coffee. that is linked to higher rates of leukemia in their child.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah,
don't
so
remember seeing that. That's interesting.
those are the only two that I know of in the data that are fairly consistent and come up, they've come up more than once in my, I'm usually reading review studies and meta-analysis because we have so much data on coffee. That I'll read a few of the original articles, but most of the time I'm looking at systematic reviews because there's a ton of data.
And I remember there was a thing when I was growing up, and so it's probably from the 80s that talked about like the risk of cancer from drinking coffee, but that was the 80s, and so that information, I think it's been shown to not be valid at this point, because there are a lot of benefits from coffee, but it's in moderation.
Yeah,
because it's just not like it has been shown to reduce the risk of liver cancer and pancreatic cancer. It's also been shown in some studies, and these are, what are they called?
observational.
Because it's not like they're not like double-blind placebo-based studies that they're, they're just
They're looking at a cohort study, like a population.
right. It's a population study, and so like up to 3 cups of coffee a day may be preventative for things like dementia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because coffee is a complex food like all other natural foods. So it's got a lot of compounds in it of benefit. It's not just the caffeine or the lack of caffeine, it's a really complex food. And there are compounds definitely that enhance cognition in coffee.
Which I think when we drink caffeinated coffee, we experience that like firsthand. Like that's kind of why, it's that alertness that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are one of the compounds, and so we said we can talk positive. So the evidence, as far as I know, the evidence shows that there's a reduction in the incidence of liver cancer. There is a reduction in the incidence of endometrial cancers, sometimes called uterus or uteral cancer. We're sure, like that's the strongest data, but there's also some associated reduction in the risk of breast cancer, colorectal cancer. There's several others. And because there's only a couple cancers that are linked to increased risk, and that's at very high dose, you can safely say that coffee is not going to raise the risk or be detrimental to people in the way of increasing risk of cancer or recurrence of cancer for anyone across the board in moderate levels. So if someone wakes up and has a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee in the morning, we can safely say that is not linked to an increased recurrence for any type of cancer. And again, this is something we have a ton of data on because coffee is such a common drink, right? So it's not like this is just a small subset of people. This is around the world and it's consistent.
So when they look at these, when they, gather the data, are they taking into account how people are drinking their coffee? Because they could be putting, as I call it, cremora wall of fire in it. Tons of sugar, those additive syrups that you get in coffee shops. Like, to me, that's not coffee.
Right.
And I know it is to many people, but I'm not seeing that as being like, oh, well, coffee's good for you, so I'm going to have 3 of these like $14 coffee drinks,
I don't see that being teased out at all. So, and it could be that the coffee provides enough underlying benefit or doesn't cause any detriment so that no matter what people do, there's still not a detriment to it. I don't know, but I haven't seen it teased out that way at all, like black versus not black and all that kind of stuff.
And I would add that putting multiple pumps of flavoring and, heavy cream and sugars, that leads to weight gain, which then is a risk. So that would be a concern. I mean, I'm not telling everyone to go out and drink black coffee, but just be mindful of how yours is being prepared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the types of compounds that has benefit there's polysaccharides, right? So there's all these different sugars that are inherent in coffee, in a cup of coffee. And some of those can be beneficial to immune function, something like Oh, a little bit like what you get out of mushrooms, kind of like the same type of compounds, these polysaccharides, right? So there's arabinogalactans, which, there's supplements that have arabinogalactans. So
Right.
this is a really decent molecule to say, okay, that probably affects your immune function in positive ways. So the mechanism, I should be clear, the mechanism of how coffee intake reduces cancer risk or risk of recurrence, depending what studies you're looking at. The mechanism isn't that well studied. I mean, all we can do is say, oh, those compounds are in there and maybe they're having an effect, but it's not clear. The other thing is it's really high in antioxidants, right? So
Right. And we did talk about that it's the heat that extracts the antioxidants. So something like a cold brew isn't going to have the same antioxidant effect.
It'll be less antioxidants. Yeah. And antioxidants are always nice to have some flowing in from foods. I mean, this is kind of like the reason we eat so many colorful fruits and vegetables. Then there's this type of compound, they're called chlorogenic acids. And they're unique to coffee. And it is thought that, because some studies showed that decaffeinated coffee also is a benefit, chlorogenic acids could be one of the reasons. And this is, vanillic acid is one of the chlorogenic acids. So vanillic acid is something that we know is anti-inflammatory and has really nice benefits. In any case, if that is the substance, then paper can remove that. So a paper
remove the beneficial substance.
Yeah. So we don't know what the beneficial substances are in coffee. And so not using a paper filter will at least ensure that whatever's in there, you're still getting it.
But I thought, and this could be old information, I thought that drinking unfiltered coffee can lead to elevated homocysteine levels and affect heart health.
If it doesn't go through a paper filter? I don't remember that. I'm not aware of it.
I learned that in school, but I don't know, if that's been refuted. I'm not quite sure, what is going on with that information, because I just thought of that.
Yeah, maybe we should check that out. I'm not aware of anything, because generally speaking, I mean, you can overdo caffeine, of course, right? We're not telling people who are sensitive to caffeine to go out and find a way to drink it. That's not going to be good. Some people have, underlying anxiety or whatever, or a stomach acid issue.
Yeah, reflux for
Big
sure.
reason.
And that's why I like that, to run my cold brew through a filter is I used to love doing my percolated coffee, but now I can't tolerate that. One of the things that I thought was interesting, where coffee has been shown to potentially reduce the risk of breast cancer, is that it can be synergistic with tamoxifen.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because we talk about tamoxifen a lot, not just because I take it, but because there's so much potential for interactions. And not all interactions are bad, but there were some articles talking about how it worked with the tamoxifen in order to reduce the risk.
Yeah, that's another link I know I have that handy in my kind of catalog of papers. So I'll hand you that one to put on Pinterest in case people want to see that. Cool. And since you've mentioned tamoxifen, and I'm thinking that makes me think about breast cancer, there's also evidence that people, and this is men and women with the BRCA1 mutation, may benefit from coffee consumption.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was those with BRCA1 mutation. They found that there was a correlation. The more coffee that people drank, the less they had breast cancer diagnosed. And it was a significant amount. I mean, people were drinking, I think it was up to 4 to 6 cups. I mean, I'm not advocating that again. It's just that's what the study had, because that's
and the study wasn't putting people in a room and saying this is what you're going to do, and then having a control group. That's not what they're looking at. So all of this information, it's just kind of looking at populations.
Yeah. So that's an observation, and that brings up a good point. And this is true as an aside for population studies in general, including the one that you started talking about at the very beginning about the hot dogs. When they're doing any kind of association like that, we don't always know the other habits that go along with that. So, does the act of drinking coffee make people, I don't know, more active in the morning because they have more energy to get dispense of? I don't know. Does it inherently mean that people who aren't drinking coffee are people who already have anxiety or a nervous system that's already jacked up? So, they naturally avoid coffee consumption. But in other words, you don't always know if the action is the cause of the association or if it's just associated and there's some other reason that this is happening. We don't know.
And I think that's kind of triggered something in my mind. I think like the old information on coffee, all of the bad information was because of things like that, where, well, maybe people, when they're having a coffee in the morning, they're having a cigarette.
Absolutely.
Or like
back in the day.
Running into, back in the day. And I mean, people still do that, but I think it was just a lot more of that, looking at other aspects of their lifestyle. I do, before we talk about the bad, I want to kind of transition with, there are issues with consuming coffee during cancer treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I have had numerous patients who do or did drink a pot of coffee. Plus, I had at least one patient that I know of that would drink 2 pots a day of coffee, related to work, having to work different shifts. Coffee is a diuretic. And so when you're going through chemotherapy, remaining hydrated is really important. And so limiting, that was always such a hard thing to talk about. And I'd have a patient come in and they'd meet me for the first time and they're like, "You're going to take me off the coffee, aren't you?" And I was like, "Well, how much do you drink?"
Right.
And they would tell me, and I was like, "Well, let's cut back. We'll go talk to the dietitian more, but I would like to see you reduce your intake, and let's try to throw in more hydrating things." So that is one big conversation I always would have with patients who are big coffee fans.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other issue, which you touched on, are stomach issues. And so with nausea being one of the most common symptoms of going through chemotherapy, and for some people as well with radiation, your taste buds change and the way you tolerate foods change when you're going through treatment, as those of us who've been through treatment know. And so anything that can contribute to reflux, because reflux can mimic, it can create nausea, which,
Sure.
Then everyone's investigating the medications that you're taking, and they're changing your medications. And it could be the foods that you're eating that are triggering that reflux, and maybe you just needed to make some diet modifications and you didn't have to go onto this whole like antiemetic cocktail.
Right. Yeah. And on that same note of reflux is also gastritis, because gastritis is very common.
Super common.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it would definitely not help your gastritis.
And then bowel issues, right? I mean, people drink coffee because it stimulates their bowels in the morning. First thing in the morning, you're having a hot beverage, you've got that caffeine. It makes people go to the bathroom, and sometimes you just don't want that depending on your treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone's experiencing a lot of diarrhea and loose stools and they're drinking coffee, consider cutting back, because that could be aggravating it. So those were always my issues that I would have, that would be a conversation I'd have with the patient and there are more. I wish I'd kept track of the patients who literally would sit down and be like, "You're going to stop my coffee." And I'm like, first of all, I'm not the dietitian.
I'll let her do that.
I'm going to let her do that, but this is my take on it. So that's kind of the transition to the bad for you part of coffee.
Yeah, I think those immediate effects, whether you're getting chemo or not, they're just more like, they might happen to you during treatment, even when you don't normally have reflux, you don't normally have gastritis, right? Because the treatment induces those symptoms. But for anyone with those symptoms already, just, chemo aside, it definitely can aggravate. The other thing coffee can aggravate is bladder stuff. When people have sensitive bladders, urinary bladder. So the coffee can be an irritant to the bladder. So it's one of those things that you cut out and see if you have less irritation. Because, especially postmenopausally, the bladder can become very sensitive to its own acidity. And so coffee is a classic stimulant for bladder irritation.
And once going through menopause, I mean, it's not always as easy to hold your urine.
Right.
And so kind of reducing those things that create
Oh,
that urgency,
yeah. The diuretic.
the
Yeah.
diuretic and because it's not always easy to hold it. That might be TMI, but we're all
No.
family here, apparently.
Yeah. It's okay. Everyone listening is family.
That's right. So looking at the bad side of coffee, what I found super interesting, because this is the good and the bad, is back in 2018. Don't you remember how California, with their Prop 65, declared coffee a carcinogen?
Oh, I do remember that. Yes.
That was because of what is it, acrylamide?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then a year later, they like rescinded that.
Yeah, that wasn't, back to your hot dog story. That was just a spin that got out of control.
But so that's kind of what I'm saying. So, but there is a substance, not only in coffee, but in other things, other foods. I'm saying it right, right?
Yeah, acrylamide. Yep.
Acrylamide, that is a known carcinogen.
Yeah, acrylamide is a known carcinogen. It's about the quantity you would have to ingest.
Mm-hmm.
So, people who are in an industry where acrylamide is being formed, that's an occupational carcinogen because they get, industrial places like plastics and some water treatment products have acrylamide. Even some cosmetics, obviously not naturally derived ones, but others. So I think that's more of an issue. I think the I don't even know how much occurs on coffee or, that kind of thing. I didn't look at the numbers, but it's not enough to add up to having a net carcinogenic effect, which I'm going to say it one more time. They've looked at this up, down, and all around. I think if we saw an increase in cancers, I think it would have been borne out in the data by now because it's such a common drink worldwide. What's really high, and maybe if anything was going to be labeled, potatoes, fried potatoes.
Right. I know. And I do love my French, but I love my
A
French
tater
fries
tot.
and my tater tots.
Tater
and
tots I love them.
potato chips, like the kettle.
Oh, yeah. See, I know. So that's when you look and you're like, acrylamide be damned. I'm eating the potato
Well,
chips.
I know. And there was a period, like, I go through these phases where suddenly I'm just like, no potato chips, and I'm only buying like the baked chips, which are so hard to find. And I tried making my own with an air fryer. I mean, it was a disaster. But every once in a while, these bugs get in my brain where it's just like, I just kind of go on okay, I'm going to reduce this my diet because, I'm trying to reduce the risk of recurrence. And I just kind of was like, no.
Well, it's good that you settle back to, moderation is the key. The question is always, what is moderation?
Mm-hmm.
So just acrylamide is a product of a sugar and an amino acid, and it creates the acrylamide with heat. So the high heat is required for the sugar and the amino acid, which is asparagine, if anyone wants to know. But but that amino acid and sugars bind together, and that's what makes the molecule acrylamide. When you just kind of, and the reason frying, like deep frying, is bad because of course it like enters the oil, and you get a lot better production of the sugars and the amino acids binding in that.
Right. And from what I remember is like the more you use, because in restaurants they reuse the oil, so the longer the oil is around, the more oil that gets reused.
Yes.
Then the greater that acrylamide buildup.
That makes sense.
So going back to good for you, bad for you, as that is our theme, where coffee has been shown, up to 3 cups a day to be beneficial in terms of reducing the risk of dementia, over 6 cups has been shown to increase the risk of dementia. So again, moderation.
But is this an association again? Like
I think probably. All of this, I believe, is association. They found people drinking over 6 cups a day, had a greater risk of dementia. And is it they're drinking more coffee because it helps them think clearer and they had dementia, onset of dementia anyway. So are they drinking the coffee kind of like to self-medicate?
Right. This is a question.
Yeah. So I do believe it all comes, as we always say, back to moderation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, back to the sourcing thing that you talked about in the beginning, too. When you buy a large commercial coffee whose names I will not say because I don't want to, you know, get in trouble, but let's just say it's a large brand that's sold anywhere for very inexpensive prices. And they're kind of remember where coffee grows. Coffee grows in jungle like settings where the plants, will come and the weeds and the bugs and the critters that you have to keep off of coffee are significant if you're going to just monocrop it. Like you take down a bunch of native trees and you put a plantation in of coffee beans, you have to spray that with some serious stuff, keep the jungle off of it. So I'm saying this because the source really counts with coffee. Like it's one of those things when people are going to do organic or buy a really a good sense of where it's being grown. I put coffee high on that list of to-dos because of where it grows. It doesn't grow in temperate climates without, like, I don't know, here in Oregon, I just bought blueberries and they weren't organic. I'll admit it. They were locally grown, but blueberries in Oregon grow very easily and you really don't have to manage pests that much, especially, in the valley where, Portland and down to Eugene, that whole area. So my point is, I know that those don't need nasty chemicals sprayed on them, but coffee, yeah, you're growing coffee in jungle regions, basically jungle-like. So you want shade grown. And when you say shade grown, now automatically, even if it's not organic, if it's shade grown, you know that it's not a giant plantation that they have to kind of, keep spraying it. And it's aerial sprays and whatever gets sprayed on those beans, remember they're green, then they get roasted and then you extract them. So you actually extract the chemical compounds that are put on those beans. They go into your body very readily. We don't know what all of them are because you just roasted them. So you take chemical compounds, you throw them through whatever that is, 500 degrees, I don't even know, 800 degrees. I don't know how high it is, but it's a high temperature. Now you've got kind of all sorts of end products that shouldn't be there chemical wise, and then you extract it and you're going to drink that. So I would say sourcing a clean coffee bean, shade grown, definitely organic, hopefully.
Especially with a decaf coffee, right? I mean, the processing that goes into removing the caffeine, making sure that the coffee says that it's organic, because if they use the strong chemicals to remove the caffeine, then they can't label it organic.
Right. And so for decaf, because they used to use kind of a methylene or some other kind of nasty chemical, and now they can do it through a water process. Swiss water process was the first one they made kind of popular, but I think there might be some other ones out there. So if it says water processed decaf, you're more likely to get a clean one without unnecessary chemicals. Because that's what we're concerned about, right? It's the ingestion of nasty chemicals.
And the impact of the nasty chemicals on the planet.
There is that. So this was our take on coffee. That was a good discussion, I think. I think we hit all the high points. I hit all of mine. Did you hit all yours?
We hit the high points. We hit the low points.
Oh, we did hit
points
the low
in
points.
Between. Yeah, no, I think we did. I think it's not as what is the word? It's not as polarizing as, like the alcohol talk, I think really brings up a lot.
Sure.
And people do love their coffee. And so finding like that there is benefit to drinking coffee within limits, with limits set around that. I think, I don't know, this one ends a little happier.
Yes, we end on a happy note. Yeah. I think. Yeah, because I've had the same experience you've had, which is that people sit down and go, they're going to take away my coffee.
Right.
But Dr. Case is going to tell me not to drink coffee. And so they're pleasantly surprised when I say, no, go ahead, enjoy a cup.
Enjoy a cup. Yeah. Let's talk about how you prepare that coffee and maybe we'll make some alterations. But
yeah, exactly. I want to ask you to modify a little bit, but I'm not going to ask you to stop.
Yeah. Well, cool. So our next talk will be on soy.
Aha, another bean.
Another bean. Good for you, bad for you?
This is the question.
This is the question.
And so, we're going to be informed by the data. We're going to go forward. We don't have any, allegiances to any one or any company? Or
I
any
have my
product?
biases against soy, so I will try to be as neutral, as soy neutral as possible.
You should voice your biases.
I will. Oh, I will.
Oh.
I will.
Oh, right.
But yeah. So I am Dr. Leah Sherman,
And I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser.
and this has been the Cancer Pod.
We'll talk to you next time. Till then.
Thanks for listening to the Cancer Pod. Remember to subscribe, review, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media for updates. And as always, this is not medical advice. These are our opinions. Talk to your doctor before changing anything related to your treatment plan. The Cancer Pod is hosted by me, Dr. Leah Sherman, and by Dr. Tina Kaiser. Music is by Kevin MacLeod. See you next time.